There's a real beautiful magic that happens when we start to understand how we relate to our words. And I've learned in my experience that the words that we would use to influence people from the stage are the same things that influence ourselves.
Meet Kyle Gray,
an entrepreneur, story strategist, and author
who will help you use storytelling to better communicate your unique value.
About everything, we form a belief or we apply a belief. And based on what we believe to be true, we decide what it means. And that happens every time anything happens.
You're exactly right, to the point that it's hilarious. Most people sitting on a pile of treasure chests that they maybe labeled them as poop. And they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so poor. I just have these boxes of poop all around me. And it's stories and moments of their lives, and they've assigned a wrong meaning to them. The most important thing you could do for yourself, and probably the most important thing you could do for anybody else, it's
Welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. Jeff Lerner, your host, always so thrilled to be back with you, having amazing conversations with amazing human beings. Today, we are joined by Kyle Gray. And before I tell you a little bit about Kyle, I'm going to tell you that I first met Kyle as a guest on his podcast. And I didn't really know what to expect. But by the end, I was transfixed that through the course of a very natural, free-flowing, just call it, two normal guys having a normal conversation. By the end, he had sort of run me through this process where we emerged from the conversation with a really nicely packaged story. And it was so cool how it happened. And that's all I'll say, because I think we're going to unpack that and more in this conversation. But I was like, dang, I'm not often impressed / caught off guard, especially when it comes to things that are around like marketing and brand. But it was a freaking, I don't want to call it a parlor trick because it was so much more than that, but it was like a profound parlor trick that obviously had something really, really deep underneath it, which is what I'm excited to be able to talk about in this context. But that said, let me give you a brief bio on Kyle. He's an entrepreneur, story strategist, author, and podcast host. His podcast is the Story Engine podcast that I was a guest on. And he helps coaches and startups and influencers use storytelling to better communicate their unique value and create connection and trust with their audience. He's got 2 books, Selling with Story and The Story Engine, 2 books on marketing and around this story methodology. And gosh, there's a lot more I could read here, but honestly, Kyle, let's just jump in. I want to get in the deep end here.
Yeah, you really hinted at the magical moment and the fulcrum, which really defines how I approach the speaking world differently. And there's a real beautiful magic that happens when we start to understand how we relate to our words. And one of the things that I think I do really differently is I go from an emotional basis, and I also approach it from an understanding of, I've learned in my experience that the words that we would use to influence people from the stage or from a podcast like this, and the stories that we would tell and the things that we would teach, are the same things that influence ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves and the boundaries and lines that we put on our lives. And the more that I've started to understand the interplay of both, the more I can see how preparing yourself to share your story from the stage is a way of upgrading your visibility, is a way of bringing the skeletons out of the closet. And what I do that's different is, instead of trying to help you find your perfect script or do these things, I know what ingredients a story needs or a good teaching point needs. And I just ask you questions and draw it out of you until I can find, it's almost like going to a grocery store, but it's in your mind. And probably to you, there's a lot of options in the grocery store, and there's 6 different kinds of peanut butters. And which one would you choose? And what I do well is I just have a sense for which peanut butter we really need for this. And I'm asking you questions and helping you sort through this so we can put together the perfect dish. And it allows people who are real high achievers, who are really smart, and who are so immersed in all of their solutions and ideas to get out of their own way for a minute and just kind of get lost in things so that we can find the right story. And I think it serves people better to ask questions and listen and pull the stories from them and then reflect them back in a way that they feel at first. Then they can put it right into action. If you can feel it and be inspired, especially by your own story, which is somewhat of a novel, if not a somewhat confrontational experience sometimes to see somebody kind of telling your moment, but it sticks it in you, and then you can go and you have the scent and the smell of what the story is and should be. You don't need a script as much anymore. You do need to practice, but it allows people to run with it quickly.
So I want to really, I want to take a step back, I think, before we get into the mechanics and really talk about story as a concept, like as a psychological concept, as a philosophical concept, really as almost like I'm using some SAT words, like an ontological and even epistemological concept, like story at the ontology being of existence, epistemology being of knowledge. Like story is at the core of how we understand ourselves and the place in the universe and how we assimilate and process information to build frameworks through which we see the world. And, when you get into you follow the thread of Jungian psychology and just human narrative. And Nietzsche talked about our narrative. You go through Freud had specific views of narrative and some of which were, I think, spot on and some of which were a little wonky, but psychology is basically the story of how we as humans understand our own stories. And then the stories become our viewpoints of the world. And so I'll also set some context here that, in the work that we do with Entra, and particularly with our live events, where our sort of basic hypothesis is that, for someone to really actualize the life they want, they have to figure out how to bring some value to the world that's not a copycat or a clone of someone else's value. And the difference between what everyone else has to offer and what we have to offer really comes down to put it in your terms, getting our story straight, understanding ourselves, understanding our own narrative, and then how to articulate that narrative, and then how to, I'll say, commercialize that narrative. In other words, human narrative, in its rawest form is kind of far too messy to do anything with in the market. So you've got to package it up and pretty it up, but preserve the authenticity of it, not try to cheapen it or make it into something it isn't. But as we help people get that done, then it's not just, oh, now I know what words to say from stage. It's now I actually see and understand the value that I have to offer. It's almost like without getting the story straight, you're kind of having to fake the idea that you even have anything to offer, because if you did, you would be able to articulate it, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. This is one of the things that I actually have a difficult time articulating and kind of leading with. So oftentimes I lead with, I'll make you more money. And then this secret, I sneak this medicine in, and then all of a sudden people's lives are different. But let me give you, since I am a storyteller, an example of this. And since you mentioned Jungian kind of things, this is an amazing example of this. I had we're going to call her Donna. She was a health coach. And she signed on for a coaching call that was precisely like the one that we did together, creating an origin story, something that we would use at the beginning of a talk to introduce ourselves and get people enrolled in listening to us. And she had a very different attitude than you did on the call. She signs up and she's like, "Oh, Kyle, I'm stressed out. I don't know what to do right now. You see, I have these women and they have hormone problems and I've been helping them as my clients." And I said, "That doesn't sound like a problem." She's like, "But I also want to work with parents with children with ADHD. But I'm having a hard time focusing on both of these things. And you know what? I just figured out recently that I have ADHD. And I've been looking back at decades of dopamine-driven decisions that have led my life every which way. And I just keep thinking to myself, if my parents had only known, they could have done something." And I say, Donna, do you want to play a game? Because she's not in the mood to write a story right now. This is not the state of mind or body that is necessary to create great stories. So I ask her to write down what she just said. Write down, if my parents had only known they could have done something, write it down, and then read it out loud, take a big breath, read it out loud, take a big breath, read it out loud, take a big breath. She does this, and I ask her how it feels, and she says, not very good. Perfect. Let's change one word. If I had only known I could have done something. Read, breathe, read, breathe, read, breathe. That feels a little better. How about, I know now I can do something? And she's like, ooh, that's interesting. And I ask her, what's one of the most important, or what's one of the biggest objections that somebody would have to working with you? Immediately she knows, oh my gosh, a parent wouldn't want to open up a can of worms with a diagnosis like this and have to deal with all these things. So what would they do? They would ignore it. What happens when you ignore it? It leads to decades of dopamine-driven decisions that leads their lives every which way. And she sees it. I know now. And that's why my message is so important. Now she's in the mood to write a story. Tell me about a moment in your life where you've seen somebody else with symptoms of ADHD. Immediately she goes to her grandson. She's telling me a story about him bouncing off the walls. The boy's father, which is her son, shouting at him, trying to calm him down, doing all the things. They both end up frustrated and exasperated, and you can see the distance and the strain between the two. And she looks at her grandson, and she knows exactly what's going on. And she sees him and wonders if he's ever going to get the real care that he needs. Because he has ADHD, and she looks back on her own life and the decades of dopamine-driven decisions that have led her life every which way, and she just thinks to herself, if my parents had only known, they could have done something. And so in the Jungian thing, and this is what's really fun and gets me excited, it's subtle, but the same line that she had at the beginning of the call that was so disempowered became one of the most crucial lines in her story to address an objection. It was the same words, but we had to go through this whole adventure in ourselves to relate to them entirely differently.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example, and what stands out to me about it is how story is context for meaning. And so there's all these things in our life, like the human brain is like a meaning attachment device. That's what we do. It's like something happened. And this is Albert Ellis is the psychologist that really delved into this, the rational motive behavior therapy developer. But it was all about there's these activating events, ABCD, activating event, belief, consequence, disputation is his model. But so there's these activating events, and about everything we form a belief or we apply a belief. And based on what we believe to be true contextually around the activating event, we decide what it means. And that happens every time anything happens. A mosquito bites us on the arm, we attach meaning to it before we decide what to do about it. Now, it happens usually unconsciously, and so fast, it's basically an automatic process, and we jump right to our reaction, or maybe with a little more intention, a response that's not so much a reaction. But even when we respond, we aren't typically aware of the meaning we're attaching to things. But so again, mosquito bites us, car cuts us off, wife answers the phone with a certain tone of voice, like the smallest things. We attach a meaning, and that drives our response. Story is the context of meaning. And so to me, as I've become like you and I really align here, and I was so excited. I'm sure you remember the exuberance I had as I was going through your podcast. Like as I started to sort of feel what was happening, I was like really, it was like getting really into a movie, especially when you're the protagonist of the movie, right? But the reason I was so excited is because I'm already so convicted that story is most people's biggest blind spot. They haven't fully assimilated the story of their life, which in the absence of intentional and conscious story, it means we have no frame of reference for whether or not the meaning that we're attaching to all the things that are happening in our life, whether it's accurate, whether it's consistent, whether it's productive, whether it's benevolent. And so the absence of story is almost like the absence of congruency of thought spread out over the course of a life. And so it's way more than just, well, let's figure out what to say when you pitch your product. This is how to make life make sense and start to give you some intention where you realize that you're not just a story liver, you're a story interpreter. And you're interpreting the life you've lived to create the story. And based on the story you create, you change the meaning of all the things that have happened and are happening. And that gives you so much autonomy and an ability to self-determine.
These are some of the most valuable reflections I've received in years. The things that you are sensing right now are some of the most challenging things for me to do for myself and dig in and articulate and explain this. And you're exactly right, to the point that it's hilarious. If we can imagine most people, excuse me, sitting on a pile of treasure chests that they maybe labeled them as poop. And they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so poor. I just have these boxes of poop all around me. And it's stories and moments of their lives. And they've assigned a wrong meaning to them. A lot of the times, especially you remember going through this process, one of the places I start is we figure out what's one of the big pain points of our clients. And we really ask a lot of questions and we immerse ourselves in those words as almost like an emotional compass. We want to start feeling the words, and then it actually activates in our brains and body the memories and moments. And so for a lot of us, we've kind of assigned a bad meaning to a lot of these moments because they were painful. Right. But now we're actually trying to go there and trying to find them, because you can't just walk down the street, or you can't just be anytime, any day and remember every memory you've ever had at any moment perfectly clearly. We actually have to lead ourselves physically a little bit there. And a lot of the time we're so stubborn in our meaning. A lot of the way people will resist is they'll try when I'll be like, tell me about a time when you had, the cash flow problems, or you were at the low point, or whatever the low point was for you. And they'll be like, it was 2018. And what I learned was that you need to hustle and grind more. Or they impulsively try to teach what the solution was instead of, and I have to catch them sometimes and be like, no, what room were you in and what did it smell like in the room? And they're like, I had this desk and these things, and it had a white spackled ceiling. And finally, they'll start to yield and go into the moment, and that's when, again, real magic happens. And like explained before, it's so much fun to see somebody resist their story at first, just like we had with the ADD story, and then totally change when they change how they relate to it, they change how they relate to themselves. Oftentimes, the biggest mountains in their business, just fall down, or the biggest problems, the biggest barriers that they think they had. And a lot of the times what I think this facilitates is it allows them to step more into their visionary zone. They're finally believing that it's a valuable thing and a valuable place to be. And if you're speaking and it's not converting that well, then you probably don't feel as confident about it, or you're having these stories that are treasures that you feel bad about yourself, and you're holding yourself back from imposter syndrome instead of changing how you're relating to them. And so a lot of leaders will do what they're good at instead of being in that visionary state which created where they are, and they'll step on their teammates' toes, and they'll create all of these fires within their business just to keep them busy and to make them feel like they're serving a purpose, and that it kind of hits this glass ceiling. And that's when a lot of people come to me. They first, because they don't have any time, because they have all these fires to put out, so we need to write something fast. And this technique's great for writing something fast, but once we actually have the conversation, we relate to the stories differently, we expand the value. They're able to claim the value of their visionary time and be in that. And that means they do what's necessary to get themselves out of the constant fires putting out, and truly be in the leadership role that they set out to be in their business.
So you've used this term a few times, visionary. And as you were speaking, that word was sort of standing out to me. I think that's a word, and I'm coming off, just so you know, it's Wednesday. I got home 2 days ago from one of our events. We do these 3-day events where, again, we're working with, usually it's between 100 and 150 people. And it's not overtly an event around story. I would say we're sort of like pre-story. We're at the level of enrolling people into seeing themselves as having the substance of being a protagonist in a story. It's sort of like pre-story. It's like it's the event's called Insight, and they're doing a lot of self-discovery, understanding behaviors, understanding thought patterns, understanding at least just some of the why behind the choices and intentions that have led them to, be in the room, right? And have led to that point. So we're not yet crafting the story, but if we do our job right, we're getting them really excited about themselves in the sense of like, okay, because it's like we're preloading the gun to shoot out and go make their dent in the universe, right? So they got to get enrolled in themselves. So I'm coming off of that like 2 days fresh. I'm rife right now in my mind of like, I experience this dissonance on a daily basis that I'm sure you do too, where I see so much more potential in most people than often they see in themselves. I already see them as a protagonist, as a hero in a story, waiting to be told and understood. They're more like, they're just not there yet, right? They're not kooky like we are. And so as you're sharing this, I'm like, that term visionary, I don't think most people see themselves as visionaries. And yet everyone is creating their life all the time. Everybody's, I think, at least conceptually enrolled in the idea that like, well, it's better to have a vision than not have a vision. And everybody has some, at least fragments of a vision, things they want to be true in their life. But to take that step to go, I am a visionary. I am the Steven Spielberg or the James Cameron of my life. And just like Steven Spielberg, the first thing he wants to know before he signs up to direct a film is what? What's the story? And yet we're the visionary directors of our own life. How the heck are we even supposed to do that without knowing what the story is? But I just I guess I'm curious, do you run into that? And you told a story of one person who maybe embodied this, but like, how often do you run into people that even having decided to be entrepreneurs, even having decided that they want to go out and make an impact in the world and be compensated for it, they still aren't fully there to see themselves as visionary story creators of their own life? It's just like almost like an insecurity or like a place they're just not ready to go.
This points to what I believe is a global problem on the scale of climate change. I believe there is a Sir Ken, I can't remember, he gave a TED talk on this. It's called the Human Resources Crisis.
Robinson. Yeah, who has currently, I believe, it may not be the same TED talk, but his TED talk on why schools are failing kids, I think, is the #1 TED talk of all time.
Yeah, it might be the same one, it might be a different one, but this idea impacted and catalyzed my kind of grandest vision for things. The idea is we all are aware of the climate crisis or the natural resources crisis, and whatever opinion you have on it, you have an opinion on it. And then there's an equally pernicious yet undiscussed human resources crisis, and it looks like this. I believe there's Einsteins, there's Malalas, there's great scientists, great leaders, great heroes latent throughout the world. We have easily all of the problems within our human capacity, or all of the capacity to solve the problems. We have the biggest problems right now we've ever faced, and we easily have the capacity within us as humans, not as chat GPTs, to solve these things. But there are Einsteins and Malalas that weren't inspired to stand up, that kept doing their job as a notary or whatever the heck he did before. And we're not accessing it. And it takes people like you, Jeff, especially like you, and people like me, and everybody listening. It's our role, and I feel it's our divine responsibility. Whatever skill set you have, whatever you're doing, whatever you're offering, and whether you're doing a CRM integration or ayahuasca ceremonies for entrepreneurs and everything in between, it is your duty to be your best you and offer your best skill sets. And it's your best, you have to feel like this is important, like it's your God-given gift to offer. You need to feel that way about it, and you need to stand for that. And that's what it takes to sell and grow. And that's what it takes to serve those who you want to serve and develop and advance yourself. And it's what we need. And what I define as a visionary is somebody who's willing to stand in the discomfort of uncertainty for longer and more consistently than anyone else in order to find the solutions and answer the questions that everybody else can fall behind. And it's absolutely true. We are all when it comes to our own lives, we are all the only visionary, that can create for us. And who knows if you're not creating your vision, where else, or it's coming from somewhere else then.
Yeah. So I literally could not be more aligned on this point. And I love calling it, a great human resources crisis, because I actually agree. I think that the failure of human beings I'm calling it a failure. Maybe that's a debatable word, but let's just for now call it the failure of human beings to see their own capacity for greatness in the context of their own life is the greatest liability of humanity. I would align with you on that. I think that when you say stuff like that, and this is maybe I'm projecting because this is what I bump up against, but I feel like we're kind of saying the same thing, is people, obviously they revere an Einstein, or they revere a Malala, or they revere, goodness knows who we revere. They revere George Clooney or Michael Jordan or whatever idol we want to put on a pedestal, right? And literally get our dopamine needs met by following them rather than focusing on ourselves. I get my dopamine needs met by watching Kyrie Irving do his thing instead of valuing my own thing as equal.
Aside, how do you get your dopamine needs met?
Me?
Yeah.
I try to be the change I want to see in the world. It's this riveting adventure to be a stand for the unlocking of human potential by trying to enroll people into the idea that they were born with a purpose as unique as they are.
That sounds like a serotonin need to me.
It might be. I don't know. I'm not a neurologist. I just know what I enjoy.
Yeah.
And
sure.
and I'm kind of speaking to the essence of what we're talking about, which is that, I guess if we hadn't already been primed by this conversation and somebody just came to me and said, Jeff, what is the biggest liability in this world? I would say it's the fact that everybody's walking around, or not everybody, most people are walking around ignorant of or in outright denial of the idea that they have a unique purpose and that they will never experience fulfillment, which is what is actually the meta want that's beyond all wants. The want of want is simply the feeling of fulfillment, which is to no longer want because I'm full, fulfilled, right? Is to find your purpose. And this is what Viktor Frankl said in Man's Search for Meaning, right? Is that that is the insatiable quest that cannot be filled by anything but itself, which is to find the meaning and purpose of our life. And there's this profound study that was done, I want to say in 2020, that said, sort of abstractly or logically, 88% of people believe that life has a purpose, that every created life has some purpose. Only 6% of people are actively considering their own purpose as much as even 1 hour per year. So 88% believe that we each have a purpose, but 94%, of that 82%, all but 6%, have somehow resolved that even though I believe that life has a purpose and my life has a purpose, I'm too busy, or I'm too distracted, or I'm not ready yet, or it's too scary, or it's too convicting of past decisions, or whatever the source of the cognitive bias is. I'm not looking at it for myself even 1 hour per year. That's how I would sort of quantify this human resource crisis that you're describing.
Well said. Very interesting lens to put on it, and I totally agree. And what makes the difference between us? I actually think the boxes labeled with poop are once again the treasures for us. I think something happened to us, or something, most of the people listening to us, something happened to you in just the right way to get your wires crossed, to get you adequately dissatisfied and yearning for that purpose, that you were forced, most likely through duress, to think about your purpose and your life. And that was certainly what's happened to me. It's something that's been hard to come by and hard won, and a question I have deeply asked and revisited and had to relate to differently. I'm not that old yet, but I feel like I've had to really come face to face with my own purpose and my own question. And there's times where I've really been in the channel, and there's times where I've been really, really lost. But so it's the same. The hope and the guidance that I provide for others is, and this is common with most people, is the same thing I'm really searching for in myself and my work.
Well, Stephen Covey said after he published The 7 Habits, he wrote a book called The 8th Habit. The 8th Habit which was sort of like his synthesis of all of it, right? I mean, it was later in his life that he wrote The 8th Habit, and it was find your voice and use it to inspire others to find theirs. And I think you could substitute find your purpose and use it to inspire others to find theirs. Find your story and use it to inspire others to find theirs. I think story and purpose and voice are all intertwined at the core of this yearning that we all feel. And it's interesting because you are consistent with one of my broadest observations, which is that everyone's purpose or story or voice, again, whatever word we choose, always involves some sort of virality or contagion component, which is that as I come alive to mine, I'm helping others come alive to theirs. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. How did you, what's your story? How did you? Yeah, you mentioned you referenced not being that old. I don't know how old you are, but I mean, you're not you don't seem like you're on the back half of life, certainly. How did you, at this relatively young age, get to this place where you're so, call it, story aware?
I just turned 36.
Okay.
And this story would begin somewhere around 18 or 19 years old. And I was playing in a band. I was playing in a church youth band as well as my own band, and writing songs. And I thought the only way I was going to live a happy and fulfilled life was by being a rock star, singer, songwriter. And let's see, right around that time, I didn't know much of what I wanted to do with my life other than I wanted to travel. And I put a lot of pressure on myself to write great songs, and I thought that was going to be the thing. And the pressure that I put on myself, I ended up kind of souring myself on the guitar and traveling around to different countries. I spent a lot of time in South America and spent a lot of time being really frustrated learning how to speak Spanish and Portuguese and express myself just by being on the streets. I had a great deal of lessons in education, and it's still hard to learn another language and be immersed in another place. I got really sick when I went to Peru. I took a swim in an Amazonian water and got really pukey for a little while, and it would change the course of my life and my health. For a long time, I would end up having really bad gut health and later on thyroid issues that through a lot of my mid-20s were kind of like influencing my body. My jaw would feel bad. I would have no access to mindset, tired, and I was just grinding. I had the grind spirit, and I was a copywriter. And I had worked for a startup for a little while, learned how to content mark and tell their story. And that reminded me of like what it was like to be a singer-songwriter. And worked with another company. You probably know him, Chandler Bolt from Self-Publishing School, helped him with the content strategy and learned how to write books and there was like something coming alive within me. And I finally saw people using speaking from the stage as a way to grow your business. And I was immediately enchanted. It reminded me of what it was like to be a singer-songwriter. And I was offering coaching on webinars before, but started working with this company and helping out all of these people and facilitating these large high-end workshops that would help people develop their talks in the course of 2 days or position themselves as a speaker. And one of them happened to be filled with health and wellness experts. I sat down next to one of them and she said, "Hi, my name's Dr. Grace and I help people overcome chronic autoimmune diseases through gut health." And I had been suffering for just long enough that I figured out that was exactly what was going on with me. And I said, "Wow, so your clients must try and do this, they want this, but that happens," describing my own experience. She was like, "You need to come work with me." And so we started working together. I used a lot of my blogging and writing skills. We ghost wrote a book. We wrote a speech, and she took me through a Hashimoto's protocol, which is an autoimmune condition of the thyroid. And within a few months, a lot of the pain that I couldn't hike a quarter mile without some serious knee pain. And a lot of that had melted away. The fatigue and the anxiety that had just plagued me day in and day out melted away. And I actually had access to my mindset for the first time. It was like a whole new world was opened up. And I saw this person in front of me, Dr. Grace, amazingly smart, impossibly difficult to communicate any of that smartness in a way that lands. I spent years suffering in this, not being aware. I had several friends with Lyme's and other gut health issues taken to the brink of suicide, and we had no idea that people like this were out there, and the ones that are sending their messages aren't reaching me. And there was this huge opportunity, and so I started working with health and wellness experts for a long time, and through that, developing my own health. And kind of tangentially to that, starting to learn about the cross-section of mental health, which is where I met somebody named Mark England, who I think you would really enjoy meeting, who taught me that technique that we did around the if my parents had only known. And this is when I started seeing how speaking from the stage and the story we tell ourselves starts to mold. At this point, I had a big agency. I had a bunch of stay-at-home moms working with me, and I was kind of using them. I was still doing this like speaking work, but I had this agency that was kind of protecting me from really standing in my full value, and I would have my team kind of serve my clients. And right when the pandemic started, I was kind of redlining my team, lots going on, lots of clients, and everything fell apart. And I was just like, I'm just going to work with people on their stories and fully own this. I ended up taking a 5-day vacation to Hawaii, which channeled in me all of the amazing adventures that I had when I was younger. And I felt that same adventurous traveler spirit, and ended up staying in Hawaii for 2.5 years, opting out of the pandemic. And in that time, going deeper and deeper and exploring the questions that we've explored today and the subtler but so much more profound impacts that story can have in people's lives. And through that adventure and experience, I've found, I didn't really say this before, but when I was younger, I was very much Christian and had a deep relationship and like spirituality. And through my 20s, the deaths of a few friends loosen that connection. And I just decided to believe in myself. And kind of in my time on the islands again, though I wouldn't say I'm Christian anymore, I do have an access to a spirituality and a purpose. And what you described and what I think a lot of us are really yearning for is just a sense of being here again that's been reconnected after a decade-long adventure. So the story has helped transform my physical body. It's helped transform my spiritual relationship. It's been a core. It's been the magic carpet that I've been able to fly all over the world and live in South America and Thailand and all of these things. And my ever-evolving relationship to it has defined my life.
So, not surprisingly, you tell a wonderful story of your life and how it led you to purpose and how it organically sort of sprouted into the opportunity that you have harnessed to create a life for yourself and a business for yourself and an impact for yourself and meaning to your life's work, not just transactional, I do stuff to get paid, but I do stuff that I love and it makes a difference. And as a byproduct, I also happen to get paid, right? Like that's what everybody, at least, I mean, I have a biased view, but from my purview as the leader of Entre, I mean, we've had 280,000 students in 5 years. Like there's a lot of people that are just desperate. I mean, desperate enough to like make crazy purchases online in the middle of the night and like buy stuff and not tell their spouse because literally we see that like a decent amount. We actually like counsel people like you need to tell your spouse that you joined Entre, but it's because there's almost this shame around, I want a life that means more. And what I think I'm sort of deducing based on our, audience and avatar analysis within our pretty large cohort of Entre students that like, what so often happens is that as soon as, I don't know, very often it's associated with like a family, like having kids, but it also quite often sets in well before that because we have a lot of younger people that are not in that situation. But there's just this sort of idea that it is like selfish or even shameful to want to be the heroic protagonist of our own adventure. And just like you were saying that, you kind of have to Trojan horse your whole process into people's, the other side of people's walls by saying, well, here, this will help you make money. We do the same thing at Entre. I mean, people come to Entre, it's called Entre. People associate it with entrepreneurship. They're like, oh, I'm going to teach me, start some kind of business and make more money. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe. Perhaps if you have enough value to offer the world, someone's going to want to transact for it. But like, there's no magic gimmick to fabricate value for you to transact with the world. You've got to be the value. And so we're going to work on you. But again, like you've got to attach that, well, can this help me make more money? Because somewhere in life, in the pedagogy of just becoming an adult human, we install into kids that it is like shameful to want like manifestation of adventure in your life that's not attached to doing something for someone else. Although ironically, doing as much as possible for other people is actually how you manifest adventure and purpose in your life. But like somehow we decouple them and then we invert the sequence. It's like, no. If it's not taking care of your responsibilities, it's shameful. When in fact, I think we have a higher responsibility to actually live a life of story and purpose and not just grind away.
Hey there, it's Jeff. So real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. I use text messages to provide unique value to the Unlock Your Potential community. These texts could just be random thoughts. It could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning, maybe giving an update on a special I'm running or some free training that I host for my community. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that is 702-996-3926. Let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, it reminds me, I feel there's a parallel if you're at a party with a bunch of your friends and you're on a diet and you're like, no, I can't eat the gluten today. And they're like, oh, so you're better than us, or like that kind of response, or it's happened a couple of times in diets. And what I think's happening is a lot of times when you are doing something good for yourself and holding a boundary and somebody else is not, the act of you doing it makes them aware that they're not, and it's kind of uncomfortable for them to experience. And I think the same thing goes when we strive for great things, because a lot of the people that we're around, and I've had to make this transition, I've traveled a lot, but I've also had to remove myself from a community that would rather just they would never ask me about the things I was trying to achieve in my business, and they would rather me crack open another beer and just kind of insult each other instead of have great conversations. And I had to move my life and find a better community. And I think a lot of us are. I've heard so many stories of people that have a great idea that aren't supported by their spouses at all, and I think it's tragic. And then with their friends or their family and their community, and like we said, it's the most important thing you could do for yourself, and probably the most important thing you could do for anybody else as well. But yeah, people don't like it, especially if you haven't been doing it for a while, and then all of a sudden you're a changing person. People will resist it.
Yeah. So one thing I'll share with you that you may know, and even if you do, I'll share it for the audience's benefit. So a lot of people think, I want to be an entrepreneur because what? Well, they make more money, they have equity, they have more upside. It's all like this sort of financial transactional mindset. And then you have some people that are like, well, I want to be an entrepreneur because I have an idea. I have a big idea and I want to get it to the world. Both of those, I actually think, miss the deeper meaning of the entrepreneurial life. The word entrepreneur comes from the French words entre and prendre, which literally means like to swim out and grasp something, and implicitly then to like bring it back to shore for the benefit of the people that were too scared to go in the water. Wow. But the formal sort of literal translation is undertaker of an adventure. Basically, it means adventurer. Like an entrepreneur is somebody that chooses a life of adventure. And that's just why I named the company Entre. It's not because I think everybody in the world should own a business and, set up an LLC and get a tax ID number and try to like hawk a widget on the internet.
Yeah.
It's because I think we're called to live lives of adventure. Mm-hmm. An entrepreneur is a word that means adventure, but resonates with people around making money. So it's my way of doing that little Trojan horse trick to get them to accept this viewpoint into their life because of the meaning they attach to it. That's not actually what the word means, but then they're delighted as they discover what the word really means. Mm-hmm. But that fundamentally entrepreneurship is the call to adventure. And, you mentioned Christianity. I'll get maybe a little over spiritual here for a second, but like trying to understand, really process what the fall of man, like this whole concept around the fall of man, the exit from the garden. To me, it was the day that the hierarchy of needs, that basically the bottom 4 layers of the hierarchy of needs got installed because of resource scarcity. I think that the pre-fall man, whatever that means to whoever's listening, I'm not trying to get preachy, but like there's this idea at our core of what would life be like if I didn't have to make money, if I didn't have to provide shelter, if I didn't have to go after food, if I could just sing my soul song and write my poetry and climb my mountain and be my full self-actualized self, right? Mm-hmm. And then all the other 4 layers, which going, descending downward would be like, social esteem, love and belonging, safety needs and physiological needs. All of that, you can even associate with this man becoming aware of his own body, his own physical nature, which, is biblically the knowing that I'm naked. But I don't think it means specifically like genital nudity. It's more of just like, I am physically vulnerable and exposed. Mm-hmm. And that drives everything that disconnects us from our higher self, is that fear of privation. And so my challenge, and this is why I love story, because story reframes life. Like nobody wants to read a story about every day I did what I had to do to feed my hungry belly, rinse, wash, repeat every day of my life. That's not a story. A story has narrative arc. A story has heroic themes. A story has all these other things that are what we're called to, that I feel like unless we have story in our life, we will default to our fallen state, because it's actually all that's left outside of story.
Yeah, I I relate to this deeply, and I still see the tradition of Christianity and the ideas as interesting stories to relate to. And one of the things that I've found that I think's parallel to what you're saying, if we think of a lot of times the chakras are the different levels. If we think of whatever the top one is the highest level, and then the bottom
it's above the head.
Yeah.
For those that don't know.
Okay. Yeah. And then the bottom one is kind of our basic needs, our bottom, Maslow's hierarchy. And it's at the bottom, and that's also where our heel is, and that's hell, is when we are just doing what you described. And the higher we can ascend in ourselves from in those Maslow's hierarchies, the higher we get into heaven, serving our greatest purpose and doing what we're doing. And so, yeah, it's a personal process, and it's happening right now. You can be in hell trying to just cover your every meal, trying to be in survival, and being in those places is unequivocally, we know that that's the least nice human experience that we would want for the most part. And then the higher up we can get personally, the closer to heaven we get. And so it's a resource that we are responsible for bringing out here, which I think kind of ties back in a lot of the conversations we've had. We
so it's
heaven to the world that's within us.
So it's interesting. I mean, story, I think we're maybe, and I know we are out of time. We're actually over our allotted time, which I'm fine with. But what a wonderful moment to sort of crest on, that story is the antidote to hell. Like having a defined, intentional, and inspiring story for your life is how you contextualize even your most sort of mundane moments to not be hellish or painful. Yeah.
And not just after the fact, looking back at them. A really good storyteller, and I have been blessed in many ways recently to have had an opportunity to do this myself, to take the pain and the challenge and what I'm currently experiencing, and as a storyteller, make a meaning of it right there. And I think that's what allows us to be visionaries. And when we're in the discomfort of the uncertainty, if we can sit in it and make a powerful meaning of it, if we can eat it for breakfast and enjoy it, that's what we're here for.
So you talk, I love that you added in pain, right? It's not just mundane moments, it's painful moments. So I'm sure you're well aware the root word of passion is the Latin word for suffering, passio. And so, when they talk about the passion of the Christ, they're talking about his suffering. But it's passion for me is the fuel. Like a lot of people think like, oh, what's my passion? My passion is photography. My passion is basketball. My passion is no. Passion is a fuel type. Passion is a fuel that you run on, and there's certain things you get involved in where that's the active fuel. But you transmute suffering into passion. I don't think it's a coincidence they come from the same word. When you contextualize the suffering properly within a story. Story is it's the laboratory in which you transmute suffering into passion to fuel your life. And that's where it's a lot more than just the ability to endure pain. It's actually the ability to value pain. Comes from story. I think it like we started out by saying, it goes a hell of a lot deeper than just, oh, this is how I pitch my product, or I tell my customer about my business. Like it's a foundation of life, and this is very, like I said, a very well accepted notion in psychology, the concept of narrative and how it's the underpinning of life. And we're doing it. We have implicit cognition. We're doing it whether we consciously do it or not. It's like if you don't get conscious about your story, then it's like all the stories that everybody else told you are your story have become your story by default because you've never challenged it and created it for yourself. So you can tell, Kyle, I am grateful for the work you do. I love the work you do. I think, as we've said, it goes a lot deeper than just helping people make money, although I totally acknowledge that's a great way to get them into the process. And it's a true way to get them into the process. I mean, I know for myself, my financial life has exploded since I've gotten better at articulating what it is I'm trying to do in the world in the form of compelling stories. So if that piques an audience member's interest, how can they go learn more about you, more about your process, or even get involved with you for themselves?
Absolutely. Jeff, I'd just love to say thank you again for creating this platform and for going on the journey that you went on, and asking me questions that I've never been asked before, and seeing things within me that I've spent a long time looking for myself. So it's been an absolute delight to be on the show today. And if anybody would like to learn more about me, my process, you can check out how I do some of my work in my podcast. I'm sure we'll have the link to your interview in these show notes. You can go to thestoryengine.co. I'm most active on Instagram at Hey Kyle Gray, or LinkedIn, which I'm just Kyle Gray. It's an unfortunately common name, but if you search Kyle Gray Story or Utah, you'll probably find me. And yeah, I'd love to leave you with the fact that it is your responsibility. You have a gift within your story. You have a gift within your pain. You have a purpose and a meaning. And no matter where you are in your journey, how far along or how not far along you are, there are people out there that are having a hard time and that need you or the skill set that you're about to develop, and they're waiting for you. And I truly believe we need everybody to be finding themselves and at their best. And there is such a beautiful, we are as the humanity nearing the end of this chapter where we're fighting the dragon right now, and everybody's waking up to it. And there's a beautiful world ahead of us. I have confidence in this.
Unlocking the human resource crisis one story at a time. Kyle Gray. No, seriously, man, it's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and a continuation of our previous one. I'm so grateful for it. Thanks for being a guest here on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Of course. And of course, to all you viewers and listeners, you know what I'm going to say. You are the best part of the show. Why we do it every time we do it. And I can't wait to see you next time. Take care.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
People were not congratulating my parents in the mid-90s for having an entrepreneurial daughter. They were like, Tina's so smart. She could have been a doctor. She could have been a lawyer. She's wasting her potential not doing something a lot safer.